Picture this. A girl's scream echoes through the stone corridors of Bleau Castle on a frigid winter night in 1457 AD. The sound cuts through the howling wind, sharp as a blade through silk. In a dimly lit chamber flickering with candlelight, 13-year-old Lady Margaret Beaufort grips the bloodied sheets beneath her, her small frame convulsing with the kind of pain that no child should ever have to endure. The midwives around her whisper prayers in Latin, their faces grave as shadows dance upon the walls. Outside, snow falls softly on the frozen ground of Bedfordshire. Yet inside this room, a future King of England is being torn from a girl barely past childhood. Margaret's hair clings to her sweat-drenched face as another wave of agony crashes over her. The midwives murmur among themselves, suspecting the worst. This child is too large, her hips too narrow. At just 13 years old, Margaret's body is not yet fully developed to endure such a trial. Yet she labors fiercely to bring forth the son who will one day sit upon the throne as Henry VIII. The irony of the moment is not lost on those present. This child, born of such suffering, will end the bloodiest conflict in English history and found the Tudor dynasty that will reshape the world. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and struggle, if you enjoy uncovering hidden truths of history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to comment below to let me know where you're retuning in from. It's incredible that we can explore these ancient stories together from different corners of the globe, connected by our shared curiosity about the past. Margaret was no ordinary noble maiden. She carried within her veins the blood of kings, specifically the blood of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, the fourth son of Edward III. But royal blood, as Margaret would discover throughout her extraordinary life, could serve as both a blessing and a curse. In the treacherous political landscape of 15th century England, where the Wars of the Roses would soon engulf the realm, such bloodlines made individuals either valued pawns or perilous threats. Margaret's path to the birth chamber began years earlier when she was still a child, frolicking in the lush gardens of Bleau Castle. Born around May 1443 AD to John Beaufort, the first Duke of Somerset, and Margaret Beauchamp of Bleau, she entered a world where alliances shifted like sand. Her father died when she was merely a year old, some say by his own hand, crushed by military defeats in France that left him broken and dishonored. Others whisper of poison as rumors of foul play taunted the nobility like vultures circling the fallen. The circumstances surrounding John Beaufort's death haunted Margaret's early years. He had commanded English forces during the final humiliating phases of the 100 Years' War, witnessing territory won by Henry V slip away piece by piece. The defeats gnawed at him like a relentless ailment. When he returned to England in 1444, courtiers noted his hollow eyes and trembling hands. He spoke little, ate less, and spent hours lost in thought. On May 27, 1444, he was found dead in his chambers at Wimborne Minster, the official cause, a fever. But those closest to him understood the truth buried beneath the surface. Whether by blade, poison, or the suffocating weight of failure, John Beaufort had chosen death over dishonor. Margaret's mother wasted no time in securing her daughter's future. The Dowager Duchess Margaret Beauchamp understood the rules of survival in an era where women and children were valued only as far as their alliances could fortify dynasties. By age 6, little Margaret found herself betrothed to John Depple, the son of William Depple, Duke of Suffolk. This contract bound two of England's most powerful families in an alliance that seemed unbreakable until politics shifted. In 1450, Suffolk fell from grace, brutally murdered while crossing the English Channel, and that betrothal transformed into worthless parchment. Suffolk's crime? Negotiating the marriage of Henry VI to Margaret of Anjou while conceding the territories of Maine and Anjou to France. His death was brutal, dragged from his ship by political enemies, forced to kneel as his captors struck off his head with a rusty sword requiring several clumsy blows. The women of the Beaufort family learned early that survival meant adaptability. The next betrayal struck when Margaret was married off to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond. A half-brother to King Henry VI through his mother's marriage to Owen Tudor, the Tudors were Welsh upstarts with questionable legitimacy, but they possessed one key advantage: the king's favor. Owen Tudor, a court official who captivated Henry VI's widow Catherine of Valois, scandalized the nobility with their secret marriage. Yet this union produced two sons, Edmund and Jasper Tudor, who were recognized and elevated by the king. In 1455, when Margaret was roughly 12 years old, she was wed to Edmund Tudor in a ceremony that aimed to cement political alliances through vows she barely understood. Their wedding took place at Bleoh Castle, the same stronghold where she had spent her childhood. The great hall was adorned with tapestries depicting her ancestors' deeds, while the chapel housed her grandfather's tomb. Edmund Tudor was a man in his 20s, seasoned by war and political maneuvers. Margaret was still a girl, growing out of her childhood garb. The marriage was consummated immediately, reflecting the grim reality of the times when noble girls were often treated as mere broodmares for dynastic ambitions. The wedding night introduced trauma that would leave its mark on Margaret forever, and the evidence of its impact would reveal itself in physical damage and a profound religious devotion that bordered on obsession. Within months, Margaret's body began changing in ways that terrified her young mind. The older women around her spoke in hushed tones regarding her condition, joyfully anticipating a potential heir while secretly fearing for the life of their young mother. Margaret's own mother watched her daughter's growing belly with smoldering anxiety. She had been 18 when Margaret was born, old enough to survive childbirth safely. Now, at nearly 13, Margaret faced a dire and dangerous journey that had claimed countless women older and stronger than her. But Edmund Tudor would never witness the birth of his child. In autumn 1456, while campaigning in Wales against Yorkist forces, he was captured at Carmarthen Castle. The circumstances of his capture and subsequent death remain murky and enshrouded in the fog of civil strife. Some accounts suggest betrayal within his ranks. Others hint at a surprise attack while his forces were scattered. Whether he succumbed to plague in prison or fell victim to murder remains one of history's unsolved mysteries. The plague narrative proved convenient for his captors, allowing them to avoid accusations of killing a royal half-brother. By November 1456, 13-year-old Margaret was a widow, pregnant, and utterly isolated in a world poised for civil war. The devastating news reached her while she stayed at Lamphy Palace in Pembrokeshire, where she prayed for her husband's safe return. As the messenger arrived on a rain-soaked evening, his horse lathered with sweat from his swift ride across Wales, Margaret's fear crystallized. She felt, instinctively, that her world had shattered. Jasper Tudor, Edmund's younger brother, assumed responsibility for his pregnant sister-in-law, a decision driven by both chivalry and practical politics. Margaret carried the potential heir to the Tudor line, the child who might continue their royal connection. He ushered her to his stronghold at Pembroke Castle, a remote fortress poised on cliffs above Milford Haven, where the relentless Atlantic waves crashed against the rocks below. Within these ancient stone walls, Margaret would endure the most harrowing chapter of her young life. The journey to Pembroke in her advanced pregnancy presented an ordeal of its own. The winter roads were barely passable, rutted with frozen mud and blocked by fallen branches. Margaret traveled in a horse-drawn litter, each jolt and bump sending waves of pain through her swollen body. The journey that should have taken 2 days stretched into 5 as they navigated around floods and avoided armed bands with uncertain loyalties. Pembroke Castle, stark and imposing, was not built for comfort. Its chambers were cold and drafty, warmed only by sprawling fireplaces that consumed wood far faster than the servants could supply. Thick tapestries hung in Margaret's room to stifle the relentless winds that whistled through the castle's cracks. Winter 1456 to 1457 proved particularly brutal. Ice formed on the insides of the castle windows, and the chilling sea winds ushered in an ominous atmosphere. Margaret, heavily pregnant and still a child in so many ways, could barely traverse her chamber without exhausting herself. The castle's physician, Dr. Lewis Carlion, examined her with growing alarm, noting that her hips were too narrow for safe delivery. He confided to Jasper Tudor that if they attempted to turn the baby, they might kill both patients immediately. They could wait, hoping nature would correct the position, but this risked both the child's life and Margaret's growing weakness. Alternatively, they could attempt a caesarean birth, a procedure almost always fatal to the mother. Jasper, barely 25 himself, was tasked with making this heart-wrenching decision. The weight of the political implications pressed down heavily. If Margaret died, the Tudor line could end with him, a younger son without legitimate heirs of his own. Yet, personal affection for Margaret, the brave, intelligent girl confronting widowhood with resilience, made the burdens all the more poignant. As the bitter winter dragged on, Margaret demonstrated extraordinary maturity beyond her years. She devoted her time to politics and statecraft, understanding instinctively that knowledge would be her greatest weapon in the forthcoming struggles. Impressed by her determination, Jasper became her mentor, teaching her to read people's expressions, hear the unspoken nuances of diplomatic language, and navigate the intricate webs of alliances and rivalries that define noble society. Margaret threw herself into her religious studies with fervor, spending hours in the castle chapel until her knees bled. She memorized Latin prayers, delved into theological texts, and developed a deep, personal relationship with God that would fortify her through decades of political turmoil. Some historians suggest her intense religiosity arose as a coping mechanism for the trauma of child, marriage, and impending motherhood, a means to ascribe meaning to the senseless suffering around her. Father Meredith, the castle's priest, became another influential figure in Margaret's education, a Welshman educated at Cambridge. He understood the classical teachings of the universities paired with the practical politics necessary for survival in such a volatile world. He imparted to Margaret that God often operated through human agency. He taught her that prayer, when coupled with purposeful action, could move mountains. On one fateful January night in 1457, as snow swirled outside, Margaret's labor began abruptly while she walked the castle battlements. The pain gripped her, a crushing sensation unlike anything she had experienced before. As she collapsed against the stone ramparts, her attending ladies rushed to help her back to her chambers. The experienced midwives exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this before: a child attempting to bear another child, nature strained past its limits by political necessity. They prepared their instruments and prayed, knowing that before dawn, one or both of their charges might not survive. Dame Gwenfch Dafford, the head midwife, was a woman well seasoned in her craft after 3 decades of delivering babies. She had learned her art from generations of women who came before her, mastering the secrets of herbs to ease pain and techniques to turn breech babies. But as she examined Margaret, worry etched deep lines in her weathered face. Other midwives prepared their instruments with grim determination. There were knives for cutting the birth cord, but also tools for procedures too harrowing to contemplate. There were hooks and forceps for extraction devices designed for medical emergencies in times of desperation. With every heartbeat, the clock of fate ticked louder, drawing nearer to what could be an impending tragedy. As the storm raged outside, the future of a kingdom rested on the fragile shoulders of a 13-year-old girl weathering both the elements and the burden of legacy.